Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Glad. I'm also good. I'm more than good. I'm honored to be meeting you. It's like a dream come true. Who would have thought? Um,
Well, they always say be careful of meeting people you think are who are
well,
you?
no, in a way, it's kind of
Oh,
strange.
writers.
Well, my name is Tarek, and I my whole life I grew up in Kuwait, and my first introduction to you was the movie, and it was on television, and I watched it, and I was like, oh, Michelle Pfeiffer's in here, and Renee Zellweger's, and I was like, I'll give this a watch, and then the impact that just how I felt, and then when I learned that it was based on a book, and then I read the book, and I it's mind-boggling because growing up, I was also it's such a small country. It's in the Middle East. Nothing really happens there. I never thought I was gonna move to the US, let alone meet with you and reading your book and even watching the movie. It was such an escapism from a reality that I never, I didn't even know what you reference a lot of California in the work and I didn't even know what that meant. So I believed you, but I didn't know what that meant. And when I went to California and I saw it, it's a bizarre experience. I also got my own like Oleanders tattooed on me.
Oh, how wonderful. You have to send me a photo.
Will do. I think that's how we interacted on social media, actually. I took a photo of my tattoo and the book alongside leaves of Oleanders. And then you liked it and then we followed each
Ah, so
um
sweet.
Thank you so much for meeting up with me. And I feel like before we delve into any details, you mentioned being part of a film school back in the day.
Yeah, I went to film school. I had been writing short stories, and a friend of mine um, said, you could really write screenplays and make money. And I had not sold short stories. I wrote them, but it took me a long time to start selling things. And the idea of like actually finding a place home for myself. So I started writing um, screenplay, reading up. I love movies. I just all I did when I was a kid was read and pretend to be sick so I could stay home from school and watch movies and read without my parents bugging me.
You like
Um,
storytelling.
oh yeah, I live in that world and movies especially. So the idea of writing screenplays, and then the more I got into it, the more I had this fantasy of becoming a director
Hmm.
because I had, I mean, I loved the great directors and I'd seen those films and I lived in those films.
Hmm.
And I applied for the um, a director's program at USC
Hmm.
and was accepted. And then I started making films and quickly learned that I was a writer, not a not a filmmaker. It's so collaborative.
It
It's
is.
like the opposite of writing, especially writing fiction, where you're just God of your own planet. Oh, it was horrible. I don't get along very well with others collaboratively, or I didn't at that time. So I dropped out the first term. My teacher had been my screenwriting teacher had been Bob McKee, who went on. He quit the same time I did, and he started teaching privately, and then eventually kind of built his storytelling empire.
Mm.
But we quit at the same time, and it was the only decent grade I got in film school. I couldn't get an exposure. Nobody, I was too bossy. People didn't want to work for me for free, and it was just a nightmare. It was a nightmare. So I learned that I really wanted to be a writer, and I wrote a screenplay or two, and they just they never sold. They weren't really screenplays. They were novels in screenplay form.
Mhm.
And I realized, if I couldn't make any money at it, why not just do what I wanted to do? So I went back to short stories.
Um, it, it, this is funny because like how was, because you liked having creative control over the project, and collaboration is difficult. Even me in film school, it is very hard to have your baby be kind of raised by a village like that.
Yeah,
How were you able to relinquish some of these stories to be made into films without knowing? I mean, talk to me about the process. Did you know how they're gonna turn
sure.
into what they
No,
was gonna be cast?
what it is I've had three different experiences now with films being made from work of mine. Had a big studio film. I had a kind of a charmed indie experience, and then a really um, low, I won't say just low budget because that doesn't mean a lot, but people who are maybe uh, more easily affected by those around them, and more rolling with the collaborative. Um, and in each case, the movie is is not what I wrote. The big studio film probably was closest,
Hmm.
um, but they took huge chunks out of the book. Um, the the way I see it is like I've matured a lot since film school. The way I see it is, you know, when in art you uh, paint a painting after another
Hmm.
painter. So if Van Gogh paints a picture after Millet, it means he paints the same subject matter as Millet, but does it in his own way.
Mhm.
It's like, I want to try that. Well, Millet doesn't breathe over his shoulder and go, well, that's not what I would have done, because Millet already did what he was going to do, and he inspired another artist to reimagine that. And so when you write a novel or short story and another artist wants to pick it up and do something with it, is inspired by it, you know, you don't, it's not your work, it's their work. So, you just see what they need, if they want advice, if they don't want advice, if they want insight, if they don't want insight, whatever they need. But you're more the grandparent than the
Mhm.
parent. You step back and it's like whatever you need.
That's a very generous and kind of encourages freedom in the arts, which I appreciate. Nowadays we hear a lot of AI and NFTs, and art is becoming this fluid thing that means so much when you know, it meant a human made product, and now computers are
Right.
making it. So it's kind of, but that being said, because you love film so much, when you do write your stories, do you envision them becoming films one day, even before they get picked up? Do you?
No, not in that way. I don't envision them becoming films, but they are they're films in my mind.
Right, right. So how is the
Um,
experience of?
to some degree, yeah, because the language is also part of it. But I do see it. I see scenes. I
Yes.
have kind of a dramatic. My imagination is first dramatic, and then I have the other tools of fiction writing, and I flesh it out. And because you're not just the director, you are the director, you're the actors, you handle the lighting, you're the location person, you're the costumer, you know
You're the God
uh
creating that word
you
world.
do all of it, so you inhabit it more fully than a filmmaker. I shouldn't say that, because who knows how a good filmmaker inhabits their work. uh, uh, but um, I have a lot more tools in my toolkit as a fiction writer
Mhm.
than filmmakers have to deal with physical reality. I remember when I was in film school, I wrote a line she picks him up and drags him onto the bed. Okay, that took me 15 seconds to write, maybe half, I mean, to figure out that she needed to, as part of the story, that might have taken a bit longer. But when I try to shoot that, she cannot pick him up. She just can't do it. It took us a long time to get that piece of film. So you're, I do see a little film in my head. Does it play? Am I engaged? Is it vivid? Is the dialogue sharp and condensed and do something? So drama, is my first thing, and then embodying it is the second thing.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience myself. I just shot my thesis a couple of months ago, and it's about grief. It's a personal story. I also act in it, but it had so many major themes in the script, and the one of the most difficult shots was as simple as the apple falls out of the grocery bag. So there's a grocery bag and there's apple that falls, and to get the shot of the apple, we couldn't get a simple apple to fall from a bag, whereas in writing it could be the most simplest of moments. As you said, it took you 15 minutes to write that idea down. So it is very technical, which can restrict creativity in a way. So how much of you do you put in your writing? And to see that book or the stories that you write be shared universally, like everybody is empathically receiving your emotion and feeling the things that you're writing, how is that different than the idea for you that somebody's also experiencing your story but visually?
It's very different, in the way that film, because of the way we watch a film, it happens to us. Whereas fiction, the reader is a partner. The reader creates the book in their head. So I remember when White Oleander was translated, it was translated into 28 languages eventually. And that the experience of people in Finland or in China or some of the other languages it was published, it's like they would bring their own experience and imagine what happens in their own way. Whereas when it's created in physical reality and filmed, the viewer sits and takes it in, and you don't get to envision it the way you can or want to. So say I'll have a scene or an interaction between characters, say a violent one. I have these Russian novels that the novels of the Russian Revolution. There are two of them my most recent books. And there are scenes of violence in those books. And as a reader of a novel, I can envision those scenes to the extent that I want to. Say I'm an extremely sensitive person, I might just be able to visualize somebody, somebody swinging a punch and not even have to imagine it colliding. I can see things to the extent that I want to. Whereas when you're choosing how graphic to make a fight scene, say, or how realistic, the viewer sits there in the chair and they see what you imagined in every detail. I mean, you can close your eyes, you can turn your head away, but there is because the experience of reading a book is a collaboration with the reader, then the reader shapes the book to the way they see the world, the way they their level of sensitivity, or how much they want to take, and in what way, or um
And you embrace
uh,
that liberty by the reader to create their own vision, kind of, or take
oh
off them.
yeah, oh yeah. So it's a partnership with the reader, and the reader has to work at it, where film is a more passive phenomenon where you're taking it in. um I had things changed from book to film because what I had envisioned and could see very clearly in my own head, the filmmakers felt that it was too much for an audience to take in. So they modified things that would have that were acceptable on the page, but would have been really hard uh, on many people um, in
I
a
think
movie theater.
one thing that comes to mind as you say this is Astrid's age as well.
There
Astrid's
you
age
go.
was changed, and to be honest, when reading the book and knowing the journey that she gone through, it's harsher to think she had gone through all of this at that age. Whereas in the film, sure, it is still harsh, but I don't want to say less harsh, but it's there's some weight difference here.
They
There's some
have different considerations. The uh, her first lover is in a home where the mother's boyfriend
right,
is a 50-year-old Vietnam vet. And my character cannot really relate to men. She's she's somebody who grew up without a father, and
right,
she's like desperate for fathering. But because she never had a father, she doesn't know how to have a father. And so she sexualizes everything.
right,
And so instead of accepting that there's this guy who is interested in her welfare and who she is, and accepting that as a father figure, she seduces him instead because she doesn't know how not to do
right.
that. But in the film, they just said nobody wants to see a 14-year-old or whatever they made her in the film. She's like 14, seduce a 50-year-old man. Nobody wants to see that. So they made the man much younger and very attractive, so that it wasn't as uh, upsetting.
Right. And I do also believe that if we were, movies nowadays are becoming less or at least more brave in pushing boundaries. I feel like if you may disagree or agree, if the White Oleander were to be made today into a film, do you think some boundaries would, or like some parts of the book would remain the same without fear of audience outrage?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like people are kind of bruised and more easily outraged now. In a way, they're more sophisticated, but they also are making a point to be more outraged. And I don't think that helps literature. I don't think it helps art.
Mhm.
I think people are becoming more puritanical rather than less.
To talk about the technicality of things, how were you approached by the filmmakers? Was it a phone call? Was it in the mail? Was it an
Okay.
email? And what kind of process? How involved were you in the production?
Well,
Yeah.
each experience was different. Okay, the first one, the big studio film, White Oleander, my agent, the publisher, was approached by the film company.
Mhm.
Um, so Warner Brothers and Little Brown they talked about it first, and it was going to be a very big deal. And then the guy from Warner Brothers um, came to a reading pretty early on in White Oleander being released, came to a reading at Book Soup here in LA. And there was a guy from the publisher as well. Um, and they went outside at the reading and talked about it. And then I get a call from my agent saying, that, there's been this offer for your book, and named a figure that just like, what? And so I said, yeah, fine. And that was it. That was it. The second time, when it was Amber Tamblyn, who was a well-known actress, she wanted very badly to shoot, or she wanted very badly to write the script and star in a movie based on my second book, Painted Black. And she had bugged my agent, I guess, over time. And my agent just kept saying, no, 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 she's not a screenwriter. She's never done this. She's never, she's a poet. She's an actress and a poet. What has she done? Nothing. And I have a friend who's a poet, a guy named Derek Brown, who's a friend of Amber's, and they've done poetry readings together and stuff. And he says, oh, you just got to meet her, let's go out and have drinks. So we went out to this place. He knew I have a weakness for tiki bars. So we all went to a local tiki bar called the Tiki Tea here in LA, tiny little place.
Uh-huh.
And I met Amber, and she was so passionate about this movie. She had storyboarded the whole thing of how she saw it. She was so excited about it, such vision, such passion. And when you see that in a fellow artist, it's like, oh, let's give this person a chance. So I said yes. And it took her so long to get the money together to shoot it that she became too old to play a 19-year-old protagonist. And but she was still, so passionate about the project, and it was interviewing directors. And I think it was Jane Campion who said, was it Jane? Yeah, who said, you already know exactly how you want to shoot this thing. Everything, like there's no room for directorial input here. You're going to have to shoot it. And so she was like, she had been in film since she was a child. She was a child actor. She had seen so much film and television shot. She had sat, with directors and seen it over and over again. Really experienced actors do know a tremendous amount about directing. And so she said, okay. And she finally got the money. She got people, she could charm the birds out of the trees. And she got free locations. I mean, the most beautiful locations. She got incredible actors to work for her for free because she'd been in the business. She knew people. And finally you saw it?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
The performances were amazing. She really knew what she wanted. She was not a collaborator so much as a general. And she knew what she wanted everybody to do. And if there was nobody, I got to go on the set. And what was interesting to see is that nobody second guessed her. She had a great cinematographer. She had fantastic tech crew, but nobody said, what I would do is like, no, no, no. She wanted people who would be part of the army and just to be as dedicated to this as they could be. And so there was nobody was pulling against her. She would have fired him. She fired the actress who was going to play Josie a week before shooting. This actress was just like the perfect actress, physically looked just like my character, was perfect in every way. But starting a couple of weeks before shooting, she started bulking. Like she didn't want to color her hair. She didn't want to do this. She wouldn't do any nudity. And she's an art model, She knew that. But then she said, she wouldn't even do like, fake nudity. And Amber just said, fuck you, go away.
Yeah.
I don't want to work with you.
And I feel
Like
like
a
it comes from
week
passion.
before. What?
It comes from passion. I feel like it comes from, I have this fixed vision of how it's gonna be. You're not
Yeah.
gonna be the single element that prevents me from making this happen.
No. And, I was shocked. I thought, a first time director would say, yeah, okay, we'll work with her. And my husband's in entertainment. He's a comedy writer. And he said, no, she did the right thing, because if before you even start shooting, she's starting to balk and say no, and once you're shooting, it's going to be a nightmare.
True.
She did the right thing. And so she got, somebody who was she said, I'm looking for warriors for this film. And she got warriors. I mean, Aaliyah Shawkat was called in a week before shooting.
Wow.
And that performance was insane. It was so good. And then the third one that I'm watching now, they fell in love with this story in Los Angeles Noir that I'd written many years ago. And they had optioned it for 8 years, looking for the looking for the money, the casting. Things came together, fell apart, came together, fell apart. They'd done a lot of horror films.
Mhm.
So this is genre too, noir. And they were able finally to get a big star, a very well-respected actor, and somebody who is now doing, just starting her career. And but they didn't want to lose that big star. When the big star starts saying, I wanted this, or she wouldn't do that, or blah blah blah, handling that is like, for a first time director, it's a couple, and he had always directed the films, and this one, they decided she was going to direct, first time director. And when to handle a very big star when you are a new director who is, has all the ego and all that, as well as being very, very talented, watching her was very different than watching Amber. She relied a lot more on her crew, and she allowed the star a lot of leeway, which Amber would have just fired her, whoever she was,
Mhm.
Uh, and it's
Wait,
not
leeway,
what.
leeway creatively, even like the actress would pick and choose things to be done creatively and narratively, and she was okay with that. Okay.
Yeah. So seeing the three ways of working with talent and putting their vision across, or working collaboratively. It's funny that the Hollywood picture, White Oleander, I had more input on the big picture than I did on the other two. One was because Amber had such a vision, she didn't want me to make some. I mean, I tried a couple of times, and then I realized, oh, what she needed was encouragement. What she needed was like big sister to go, just go for it. Yeah, you're doing, I believe in you. That's what she wanted. And so that was my role, was just cheerleader, which was fine with me. And this third film, but the first film, the the producer invited me to, speak to them whenever he wanted, whenever I needed to say something, ask my opinion, the
You were on
director as
set,
well. Um, well, starting before the set, like reading the script,
preparation,
seeing
yeah.
the table read. The one thing you have no control over is casting. They're going to cast whoever they're going to cast. But I was able to quietly talk to the producer when people were saying things that the characters would never say ever. Um, the director took me out to dinner and asked me questions about my characters that I didn't really know. I had to think about, you know. Michelle Pfeiffer took me out to dinner and talked about, asked me a bunch of questions about her character. She said that she'd never met anybody like Ingrid. That if she, growing up, when she was growing up in Orange County, Star would have been like the
Mm,
most glamorous person she could possibly imagine,
mm,
let alone somebody like Ingrid. So
mm,
I had to kind of fill her in on Ingrid's backstory and who she was. And so there was a lot of input. I got to go to the set. I got to go to every set except for Robin Wright Penn, who didn't want anybody on the set when she was working.
mm.
But the other ones, they let me go on. They, and if I saw something or heard something and had an idea, I would quietly talk to the director, um, away from the actors stuff, just very quietly, and never pressuring anything. I mean, I would say something to the producer, or I'd say something to the director, and then they would do whatever they were going to do. I never said, I would never come back and say, well, I thought I told you.
Right.
It's just like you're giving a little bit of advice, and if they don't want to take it, it's their film.
Did you feel
um,
heard though? Did you by the director when you gave your input?
did I feel heard? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt heard. And I when they, if they did something else, it was for other reasons that I would not have known about.
Mhm.
um, so it's always their film.
I know you
But
you said you the least involvement was with casting. Were you pleased with the casting of all three productions? But mostly Oleander has really A-list actors in it.
I would say I was generally pleased, with everything they chose in White Oleander. Maybe uh, one or two exceptions.
Right.
I was pleased. They put a lot of my dialogue back in. The producer was John Wells, so he's a writer as well.
That makes sense.
So he was more sensitive to the actual lines, and the screenwriter was a little bit more of a like popular slash commercial kind of writer, and
Hmm.
he really believed in the the lyrical quality and the intelligence of the book.
Hmm.
And like there was some, a line in there, of come and give me a huggy or something. And I'm like, I mean, Ingrid would never say, give me a huggy, no, 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 no. But I said that very quietly to the producer, not to the screenwriter. It just, you don't want to disrupt a huge machine like
Right.
that.
Right. No, that's true. I mean, one of the many things I myself got excited about, which I did the reverse. My introduction was the film. Um, and then when I went to read the book and I could recognize some of the lines, I got excited. I was like, oh, I can, and I can quote these I do quote these on the daily. My friends are like bored of me and like, loneliness is the human condition. Um, but it's, you spoke a little bit about how everybody has their own interpretation of these stories that you write. And I think not only do I believe that, but I feel that because um, I'm an Arab person from Kuwait. Ingrid's coldness towards her daughter was never translated to me or related to the word evil. I never doubted that she loved Astrid as an audience member from a different society, from a different region, from different culture. Whereas when I watch it with people all around the world, it's funny when I hear what they think of Ingrid and what they think of Astrid. But it seems that you enjoy this. You enjoy that everybody has a different take.
Yeah.
Um, have you tried, or were you thinking, or are you thinking of screenwriting, just writing a script, not a story that turns into a script, but writing a script for a film?
No.
How come?
I am the worst screenwriter known to man. I'm a novelist, so I throw everything in. I want to look in every drawer. And screenwriting is a very elegant form. and everything is pared down, and you have to trust the director. You have to trust the actor. You can't become too directive. Whereas my screenplays, they just don't have that elegance of a short. It's more like a short story, and I am a novelist, so I'm definitely going to throw everything in. Even my screenplay was like 180 pages long.
That's
I'm not a taker outer, so I never say never.
right.
um but I think I found my form. So
Uh,
they are movies, they are little movies, and
absolutely.
maybe someday I would, but it would probably be writing a script from adapting a story.
From adapting story. That makes sense. Which is also it's unusual for me to hear because the the norm, I guess, or what people usually assume is that writing a novel is the more elegant or the more difficult task than writing a script. But you're saying your comfort level is in writing a novel, or you're so comfortable and accustomed to it that writing a script would be the challenging or the
Yeah, I could, somebody asked, should I write a novel or a screenplay? And it so much depends on what kind of a writer you are. Like, what's easier, a screenplay or a novel? I think a bad screenplay is easier to write than a bad novel because it's shorter. I mean, I could write a bad screenplay probably in 2 weeks, but it would take me at least 8 or 10 months to write a bad novel. Uh, Whereas to write a good novel takes a long time. But for me to write a good screenplay could take my whole life.
Mhm. Do you find yourself reading screenplays? Do people give you their screenplay? No.
I
So
cannot read screenplays. I can't read them. I don't understand them. I can't read them. I can read them after I've seen the movie,
that makes sense.
and then I can understand them. But if I haven't seen the movie, I can't just sit and read a screenplay without the inner thoughts and the landscape and the gestures and all that. I can't read plays either. I have to see the play and then read it.
Um, in your with your experience, what do you think for me as a filmmaker, what would you tell me makes a good story? I made my thesis after graduation. Um, it's the start. I start making films. What advice would you give me and people in my year about storytelling? What should we like anything you would tell?
Okay, the most important thing I can tell anybody writing in any form,
Mhm,
but especially uh, in a dramatic form,
mhm.
is every line $1 million line. Nobody should say anything. Anything anybody could say, nobody should say. Every line, I talk to my fiction writers about this. You have to imagine the very best actors in the world saying those lines, and very temperamental. Like, they'll walk off if you give them crummy lines. Um, so nobody's the straight man. Nobody says, what do you mean by that? Coffee? Want some coffee? No. Dialogue is for conflict. If you don't have conflict, you don't need the dialogue. You don't need anybody to say anything. And um, film is not as big a problem with this as fiction, which is entrances and exits problem. People taking too long to get into the scene and too long to get out of the scene. And then you kind of lose your juice for the scene. So, but in film, because it's so expensive, you're automatically trying to cut things as close as you can.
Mhm.
So it's not as big a problem. So I'd say the dialogue. I mean, I've watched a lot of movies, and I'll tell you, smart dialogue. Oh, what did we watch? We just watched Red, the Polish French director. Um, and God, the dialogue was so good. Every line was good and unexpected. Nobody says what you think they're going to say. They say something else. So when you're writing dialogue, think about what would most people say here? Okay, now what else can I have them say?
Hmm. It's a very, very good tip, actually.
Because people remember good lines.
They do. I'm a good example.
Yeah, they remember lines, they remember moments.
Mhm.
So you make sure you have moments. My husband wrote a book on comedy writing called Comedy Writing by Andrew Nichols is his name. And he says there's a line, what is it? Moment, line, and there's something else that he suggested, to pay attention, to make sure scenes have, something happens in the scene where they can't go back the way it was before. That's not as hard in film. Novelists, because they have so much room, they
Mhm.
tend to repeat scenes that we've seen already. Line, moment, and scene. So what people remember are moments and lines.
Moments in line.
Uh, so a good line can make the whole movie. Oh, remember that movie? Remember when the guy said blah?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Um, Also, being an author who was approached by filmmakers, what's a no-no when if we are to approach authors of novels, short stories, even poems, and we want to turn them into a movie, what's a good way to go about it, and what's not a good way to go about it?
Well, the way you went about contacting me through my publisher is the correct way to do it. You always give a little extra credence to somebody who knows that there's a proper way to do it.
Appreciate that.
To the little hint is to talk about what you liked about their work rather than what that you're just a big fan.
Mm.
That it shows your insight, and don't give up. If you're passionate, it's that how passionate about this am I? If you're passionate about a person or you're passionate about a project, you just don't give up. You just keep. I mean, Amber just dogged me for about a year.
And
She
that
sent
didn't
me records. CDs. She bugged my agent who kept saying no, 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 because he had an opinion about her. And she went, "Do you know her? Do you know her? Do you know her?" She just kept at me
and that
until
didn't deter you, that drew you in.
she finally found somebody who could talk to me. Because she saw that my agent wasn't going to help. Um, what you see in the thing, you know, um, that's what the writer will respond to, is the intelligence of the interaction. Um, and what else? I mean, certainly if you know somebody they know, and you've tried the main channels. Um, what other thing will help you? Short stories are always free, always available. And I think a short story makes a better film than a novel does, because a novel you have to cut down to adapt it,
Mhm.
whereas a, a short story is already like a screenplay,
Mhm.
and there's room to inject new scenes, new characters to build it out.
Mhm.
I think it's a more elegant form. Whereas, to adapt a novel, you're getting in there and just slashing with a machete, trying to get it down to 2 hours. I think the limited series is more like a novel. I think it adapts a novel better than a film does.
And it's a new, very popular form now.
Mhm.
Limited series. It's very popular.
Yeah, I
Um,
like them.
yeah, me as well. I've watched also A-list stars are starring in a lot of them.
Mhm.
Uh, um, yeah, I think that's all really the questions I have, unless you have any
Cool.
advice you want to give me, any
Other advice
words of encouragement in general.
for okay, the dialogue note, um, really sharp dialogue and not just conventional, you know, people in art, this is an art form. It's not nature. So all that meet and greet in film, in drama, any kind of you know, dramatic work, the power goes to the silence. So if a person says something, the other person doesn't. They don't throw the ball back. You throw the ball and they catch it.
Mhm.
That person has the power in the scene. And in any scene, somebody wins and somebody loses. It's a conflict, and somebody wins, somebody loses, and when that's clear, that makes it a powerful scene.
Hmm. Do you have
And,
examples of films that stand out to you
oh
with
yeah,
great?
my favorite films are always the films that made me want to go to film school were Apocalypse Now,
Mhm.
Godfather,
Uh-huh.
uh, and Bergman and Persona. So those three films, especially the visuals of Apocalypse Now, and really, I watched Soderbergh. We just watched The Limey, and for the film to actually do something with the visuals, not just dumbly standing by telling the story, is the equivalent of style in the sentence. To have some style in the visuals, not just props and costumes and lighting, but style in the way it's shot. Man, that Soderbergh, you could just watch it. And Tarkovsky is one of my favorite filmmakers in writing the Russian novels. I watched The Mirror
Mm.
over and over and over again. Um, I think that telling as much as you can without a lot of yak is really good. Um, but just making sure that it's beautiful and interesting and that you use the visuals in an interesting way.
Thank you so much. And personally, thank you very much for writing such an impactful, beautiful story that reached me in a place that's almost unknown. And like, just thank you for giving the world this art, because
Thank you.
um, you create, and that creation at the end of the day is for people to feel and for people to experience. It's a way to escape to these worlds, and in a way I've traveled. You had me travel into a world that I knew nothing about, and then going to actual spaces you mentioned. And oh, I was only a couple months ago, Miss Fitch, I saw the first wild oleander in the wild, climbing to the Hollywood sign with my sister, who's she visits the US also. And me pointing at it, recognizing, it's like, oh my God, an oleander. It's it's a simple moment like that, but to me, that flower, that memory is much more than a story. It kind of shaped up my vision and my
So
creativity, and I really appreciate that.
are you looking mostly to write, or are you also directing?
Both. I'm a director, but I've so far I've directed things I've written. My last thesis, hopefully when it's done, I can share it with you personally, as I submit it for festivals, but I would give you the link to watch it. It's about I lost my father 2 years ago abroad, and I wrote this story about what it's like to receive the news while being abroad, and it was around the Trump era and like the borders, and I was afraid of leaving to go mourn my dad,
Oh
uh,
God,
not being
I'm
able
so sorry.
and not be able to come back. So I actually didn't go back. Um, so but my film begins with an actual moment that happened to me in real life, where my roommates knocked on my door here, and I opened the door, and the first thing she says, "Your dad's dead." And that's how I start my film, because that's how it actually happened, and that was the moment. And it's a short film about navigating the day that I learned about the news. And there was another moment who I had a professor, screenwriting professor, said this is also a moment you should have, that happened in real life, where I don't know, I'm abroad, I'm not there, I don't know how to process grief. I had a friend visit from Philly the moment they learned about the news to come and help me. So I also felt that need of, oh, well, I have a guest, I have to accommodate them. So I I played video games. And while playing video games, I asked, do you think this is not okay that I'm playing video games? So that's also a moment in the film. And I'd love to share that with you after it's done.
That's fascinating
Thank
because
you.
grief is so, it's not at all. It's like, well, Paint It Black is also about
Yes, while
grief.
watching Painted Black and starting to read a first couple of pages, the moment the phone call came about, and the moment and then I watched the film, I told my partner, I was like, oh no, this is also about grief. It's like this theme is following me. But
Yeah, it's there's no, that is such a good thing to create art about, that to let people know that there is no right way into grief, and that grief has it has levels, you
absolutely,
know and it has, there's moments of wild humor, there's moments of acting out in a weird ways, it hits you at odd moments,
true.
you think you're okay, and then
Yeah,
something happens, and it's a story that unfolds. So I think it sounds really very lifelike, and people will really respond to it.
I hope so. I hope you do when I finally send it to you.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
it's been wonderful talking to
It's
you.
been more wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for your time and just doing
And
this.
is it raining back there, or do you still have snow?
No, it's right now it's actually getting warmer. It's like the beginning of spring here in New York.
Nice. Yeah, we've just been it's just been raining like crazy the last month or two. And
Just good for Cali, no? We like it.
yeah, it rains. We don't say Cali,
No.
California.
California.
Uh yeah, it's like, you know, like people don't say San Fran, it's like San Francisco.
San Francisco. Okay.
And they say the city,
The city.
just like primitive people always call themselves the people, and everybody else are the barbarians, so they call themselves the city. But yeah, it's always California. um the We need it so bad, and it rains and then it stops and the sun comes out and then it rains some more, so it has time to absorb, but still it's like enough already.
Enough already. Yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you
All
so
right,
much for your
take
time.
it easy.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.